Chapter 9. It was an abstract rendition of a forest, very heavy on green swirling lines. All right, so I did draw a forest, Audrey said. I have always had nightmares about them, but I never knew why. I didn't even know what forest I was scared of. He picks up on our subconscious, said Dee. So what happened to you two after we got separated? Jenny asked. Not much, Dee said. They put us in that room, only there wasn't any door at first. Then we saw the door, and at the exact instant those corpses appeared and Audrey started screaming. What about you? Did you see the Earl King? Jenny looked away. Sort of. It was Julian playing the part. She hesitated, then blurted. You do know that it's because of me you're suffering, don't you? It's me he wants. He told me that if he'd stop hurting you if I let him. Don't you dare, Dee said, slowly, eyes flashing. Don't even think about it, said Audrey with equal heat. Jenny nodded, feeling warmth in her eyes. To cover it up, she watched Audrey. While they were talking, Audrey had efficiently put her hair back up, fished a quilted pouch out of her jacket pocket, and deftly restored her cherry lipstick. Audrey had always seemed so cosmopolitan, so invulnerable, but now Jenny had seen beneath the facade. It must have been hard, living in all those different countries, she said slowly, and glanced over at Dee. Audrey paused a moment in the midst of fluffing her bangs. She snapped her compact shut with a click. Frankly, it was awful, she said. You can't imagine the culture shock, the dislocation, the insecurity, and you never know when you're going to move again. Even now that Daddy's retired, I still feel like it's hard to make real friends. Audrey nodded. I feel as if we might be picking up and going again any minute. You are not, though, Jenny said. You're staying here with us. She glanced at Dee again. Right? Oh, naturally, Dee said. But there was no rancor in her voice, and she laid a slender dark hand on Audrey's back. You know, I don't understand, Jenny said suddenly. Those guys in the forest seemed nice. So why did they do it? Why did they hand us over? Well, elves are supposed to do people favors, answer questions, do work for you, but they always want something in return. And if you call them up and try to trap them, they sometimes trap you, take you to their world. I guess those guys figured we were more expendable than they were. Jenny nodded. One more thing. Always one more thing, said Dee. Which of you did the door? I know I didn't put it there because I've never seen a door like that. I did, I suppose, said Audrey. I saw doors like that in Germany, but I didn't put it there. It just appeared. You can't change things here by using your mind, Dee said. You have to deal with everything here as if it's real. But where is here? Audrey said bleakly. Good question, said Jenny. It's nowhere on earth. I know that from what I saw out the window. The shadow world, Dee said. Remember the instructions? A world that's like ours but different, that exists alongside ours but never touches it. Some people call it the world of dreams, but it is as real as anything else, Jenny quoted. Well, it touched our world tonight anyway. What's wrong now, Audrey? It just occurred to me, in Norse and German legends, there are supposed to be 9 worlds. Our world just the one in the middle. 9, said Jenny. 9. There's Asgard, which is a sort of heaven, and Hell, which is a sort of hell, and a world of primal fire, and a world of primal water, and a world of primal wind. But listen, there's also a world of primal ice. It's sort of connected to hell. And it's also a world of shadows. It's called Nephilim, and Nephil means dark, shadowy. Just what are you getting at? Dee asked. I don't know. It's just strange. Nicht wahr? God, I'm starting to think in German. But it is strange, isn't it? With him calling himself the Shadow Man. And I just remembered something else. The things that live in Niflheim are supposed to be terribly destructive, so they are under a rune of restraint to keep them from getting out of their world and into other people's. I don't remember which rune, though. You are not saying runes are real, Jenny said. I mean, like the one Julian talked about, the one that pierced the veil between the worlds. They can't really work. I always assumed they didn't, that it was just a silly superstition, but now I don't know. They work in legends, all right, to let you, what do they call it? Fare forth between the worlds. Or summon up things from the other ones. The way those German boys summoned the elves. The talk was making Jenny very uncomfortable. She didn't know why, and that made her even more uncomfortable. Something to do with runes, a long time ago. After all she had seen, why should it upset her that runes might be real? That day in her grandfather's basement. "Look," she said abruptly, "we've been standing here gabbing forever. Don't you think we'd better start looking for the next person? There is a time limit, you know." "Right," Dee said, always ready for action. "Do you want to split up again?" "No," Jenny said quickly. "Let's stick together." By whatever weird laws operated in this place, she had already yielded Julian the right to touch her hand, her cheek, her hair. And he had made it plain that he wouldn't be satisfied until he got all of her, bit by bit. It was just a question of what kind of ruse or threat he planned to try next. Jenny figured the best chance was not to be caught alone. They found Michael on the third sweep down the hall. He was wandering back and forth in front of a door, running his hands through his rumpled dark hair and muttering. He brightened considerably at the sight of the girls. "Audrey, at last! It seems like years." "Oh, I've been counting the seconds we've been apart," Audrey said, raising an eyebrow and dimpling at the same time. "Me too. I only wish I had a calculator to keep track." And neither of them meant a word of it. Lucky for them, thought Jenny. Love for Tom was like an aching bruise in her chest. If only she could see him, just for a moment. They explained to Michael everything that had happened to them. He told them that for him the parlor had simply disappeared while Tom was cowering from the invisible creatures. Then he had found himself in front of this door. He had tried the knob, but it wouldn't open. He had been pacing the hallway ever since. "And you never saw a staircase?" Jenny asked. "No staircase, no other doors, no nothing, no people until you came." "And yet we've been walking this hallway for hours, and we've seen 3 doors, and I came up a staircase," Jenny said. "It's just one more weird thing about this place, which we don't have time to discuss," Dee said. "Let's move, people. Who wants to try this door?" "This time let's try to keep it open after we go in," Jenny said. "That is, if we don't need to slam it shut fast." "We can't go in at all. It's locked," Michael said. Dee flashed him a grin as she took up a heel stance, ready to do a forward kick. "Bets?" The door opened easily when Jenny twisted the knob, and no monsters jumped out. Dee caught it as it swung and held it against the wall. Through the opening, Jenny could see dimness. You first. I am a registered coward," Michael said. Jenny took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped over the threshold. Into a hallway identical to the one she had left. She looked up and down it in bewilderment. What's going on? This door wants to close, Dee called. It's... Jenny gave up and beckoned Audrey and Michael in. It's the same place, Audrey said, looking around. This hallway was the mirror image of the other. Same gloomy carpet, same creepy wallpaper, same candles in brass holders. Michael went back through to Dee's side. Look, the candles even have the exact same drops of wax running down. It really is the same hallway, not just another one like it. No matter how many times they went back and forth over the threshold, they kept getting the hallway. For some reason, it's not letting us into your nightmare, Jenny said. We just keep getting bounced back here. Oh, too bad, said Michael. I'm really going to miss facing it. All right, let me see this. Dee finally went through, the door swinging shut behind her. Yep, same place, she said, looking around, like a revolving door to hell. Wasn't it Sartre who said hell was eternity spent in a room with your friends? Michael asked grandly. Oh, quit showing off your A in world literature, said Jenny. Unless, was that your nightmare, Mike? Michael deflated a bit. Actually, no. Mine was more of a kid thing, really. But what was it? Michael seemed to be blushing, scratching under the collar of his grey sweatshirt. He shook his head. Each of you has a secret you would rather die than reveal. Dee quoted portentously from the game card. I'll bet it was something really embarrassing, like the potty monster, huh, Mikey? As she spoke, she turned the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. Oh, great, it's locked again. If we are stuck here again, we might as well sit down, Audrey said. There didn't seem to be anything else to do. They sat and Michael talked. One thing you could always count on, Jenny thought, that Michael wouldn't run out of things to talk about. When I think, said Michael, that I could have stayed home and watched Ren and Stimpy tonight. This isn't much of a game. No reset. It's win, lose or die, Michael said. You heard the one about the bunny and the hair dryer? Michael, Audrey said scathingly. While he was talking, Michael had taken off one of his battered tennis shoes. It had a hole in the toe. Audrey stared in genteel horror at his limp sock on the floor. I can't help it. I've got an itch. Ah, that's better, Michael said, scratching vigorously. So, what did you say to that guy after we all got whooshed out of the parlor? he said to Jenny. I mean, he fumbled for words as all three girls looked at him. I mean, it was pretty obvious that he wanted. And you said he kept you there alone. Whatever he wants, Jenny said shortly. He's not getting it. Of course not, Audrey huffed. What an idea. She wouldn't give him the time of day, Dee said curtly. I don't even know what he sees in me, Jenny said. The others all looked at each other. Then Dee snorted. No, you wouldn't, would you? But everybody else does, except Zack. Probably, but then he's your cousin. It's not just looks, Audrey said. You're good, too good sometimes, I've told you. Abba would say your soul is straight, Dee interrupted. Just like a Girl Scout, Michael said helpfully, sweet and simple and honest. But he's bad, Jenny said. That's the point, Dee said. Badness always wants goodness. And opposites attract, Audrey said grimly. Look at Michael and me. Michael said hastily. So who do you think he is anyway? I think he's a visitor, Dee said, to Jenny's surprise. You know, an alien that abducts people. Michael stared, scratching his chin. Audrey frowned. Don't be ridiculous, she said. He's no alien. Just look at him. And where's his spaceship? I think he can look like whatever he wants to, Dee said, scratching her arm. And maybe they don't really need spaceships. He's taken us to another planet, hasn't he? Another world, maybe. There's a difference, Audrey shot back. And according to him, he did it with a rune, which makes him... What? The Earl King? I don't think so, dear. You're just saying that because it's what you're most afraid of. And visitors are what you're most afraid of, dear, Audrey said, working her perfect nails over her palm. It was turning into a vintage the Audrey feud. Girls, girls, Michael said. Personally, I think he's a demon. Jenny's demon lover. He smiled ingeniously, digging under his collar again. Dee and Audrey both glared. Jenny just felt a chill deep inside. Look, I believe in demons, Michael said. Why shouldn't they exist? And if they do exist, that guy has gotta be one. Throughout this conversation, Jenny had gradually become aware of a discomfort. The skin on her arm was tingling. No, itching. She scratched it absently, but the itching got worse and worse. She looked down. Even in the dim light, she could see the mark on her arm, a dark spot, like a strawberry birthmark. But she didn't have any birthmarks, And this spot wasn't strawberry colored, it was green. At the same moment, Michael, who had thrust one hand inside his sleeve to scratch his arm, made a strange sound. His eyes bulged, his expression changed. He shoved the sweatshirt sleeve up. Jenny gasped. There was something growing on his arm. A plant. There were leaves, fresh and green and young, looking like newly sprouted mint, growing from his flesh. The next instant they were all on their feet, looking at themselves in the candlelight. Each of them was growing patches of green. Jenny's were like moss, Audrey's like mold. Jenny gulped. Like Dee and Audrey, she was horrified, but Michael went hysterical. "Get it off me! Get it off!" He thrust his arm out blindly at Jenny. Even gritting her teeth, she couldn't bring herself to touch the sprigs. Dee took hold of one and pulled. "Ow!" Michael yelled. Dee stopped. "No, go on. I don't care how much it hurts. Pull it out." Dee pulled harder. The plant hung on. Jenny could just glimpse a network of thin roots like white threads connecting it to his arm. Blood began to ooze out of several pores as Dee kept pulling. Michael was screaming. Finally, Dee swallowed. Her nostrils flared. "Mike, I can't keep pulling. I can't. It's taking your skin with it." "I don't care. I don't care." Michael still wouldn't open his eyes. He grabbed at the plants himself with his other hand. Jenny pressed a hand to her mouth to stop from gasping. Sprigs were growing on his other hand too, growing even more luxuriantly than on the first. "Mike, it's all over you," she whispered. Michael's eyes flew open, and he looked at his hands. "Oh God! Oh God, God, God!" In one frenzied motion, he yanked his sweatshirt over his head, pulling his arms out. His chest and stomach were thickly covered with new leaves. They stirred with his breath, brushing one another lightly. Michael's screams rang from the ceiling. "Chill out!" Dee finally got him in a chokehold, preventing him from running raving down the hall. His eyes were wild and set, and he was breathing like a lathered horse. "We've got to do something for him," Jenny said. She could hardly bear the moss on her forearm, but she had to forget about that. Michael was so much worse off. "Yeah, but what?" Dee was trying to keep Michael under control. He seemed about to go into convulsions, clawing at himself. Audrey stepped forward. Jenny guessed that she was actually more upset by the growths than anyone but Michael. Appearance meant a lot to Audrey. But Audrey had herself in iron control. "Michael Allen Cohen, look at me," she rapped out. He turned wild dark eyes on her. "You calm down now. Understand? First hand say?" A glimmer of sanity showed in Michael's eyes. "Right now," Audrey said severely, and putting her palms on either side of his face, she kissed him. When she backed up, Michael had cherry lipstick all over his mouth. He looked a lot calmer. "I live to obey," he said weakly. "You live to kibitz," said Audrey. "We have all got to stay calm," Jenny said. "We've got to think. How can we rid of these things? We can't pull them out, so what else can we do?" "Weed killer," Dee muttered. There was some exotic red and green-leafed plant growing on her, almost harmonizing with her dark skin. "We don't have anything here to work with," Audrey said. "Never mind anything deadly to plants." Michael spoke up in a whisper, but a whisper with a new note in it. "We've got fire." Jenny looked up at the candle in its brass holder. "You can let go of me now," Michael told Dee. "I won't go anywhere. I want to see if that candle will come out." Dee released him. He tried to take a step, then stopped. He squatted down to stare. His head almost at floor level, Jenny bent too. His bare foot was rooted to the floor by a mat of white tendrils. They were growing out of his sole and into the black carpet. He could barely raise his foot an inch, and only by turning it sideways could he see the roots. As Jenny slowly looked up, she expected him to go frantic again, but Audrey reached out and firmly took his hand, her fingers crushing the leaves on the back. Michael was shaking, but he stayed rational. "Get the candle," he said thickly. Dee lifted it out easily. "I'm going to try it on myself first," she said. "No, me." Dee slanted a sloe-eyed look at him, then nodded. She tilted the candle to apply the flame to a leaf on his arm. The leaf seemed to melt slightly in a crescent where the flame touched it. There was a bad smell as the edge blackened. Nothing else happened. "Try the roots." Dee tried lower, very close to Michael's skin. Michael flinched away from the heat, but Audrey held him steady. The plant started to shrivel. "That's it." "Can you stand it?" Dee asked. "I can stand anything to get these off. With the right kind of incentive, of course." He looked hopefully at Audrey, who was still holding him and murmuring encouragement. Jenny smiled to herself. To be inane and lecherous when you are scared to death required a special kind of bravery. Dee burned more roots. The plants began to drop off more and more quickly, shriveling at the first touch of the flame. Michael was almost sobbing in relief. His arms and torso were clear. "Anything, lower?" Dee gestured with the candle at Michael's sweatpants. "No, and watch where you're waving that thing. I plan to be a family man." "Look," Jenny said softly. The patch of moss on her skin was getting smaller and smaller. In a moment it had faded altogether. The same was happening to Dee and Audrey. Michael's feet came free of the floor. And then they were all laughing, admiring their clear, perfect skin, touching it, holding it up to the others, just exactly like the scene at the end of Ben-Hur, Jenny thought, where the two women are miraculously cured of leprosy. Michael put his sweatshirt back on and kissed Audrey once more. "You had some mold on your lips before," he said. "I didn't like to mention it." "No, you didn't, Aud," Dee muttered in Audrey's ear. Audrey looked helplessly at Mike, but with some indulgence. "So this was your nightmare, and we got through it," Jenny said. "This hallway is your nightmare room, which means that if we go back through that door—" The door opened under Dee's hand. They walked through into the hallway, apparently the same hallway they had just left, but with two differences, Jenny noticed. In this hallway there was no candle missing from the bracket, and there was a scrap of white paper on the floor. A picture of a huge green plant, something on the order of a rubber plant, with arms and legs sticking out, no head. "Ugh," Jenny said. "My nightmare," Michael said, still looking embarrassed. "Turning into a plant. It's so stupid. I think it came from this book I read when I was in third grade. It had a story about a kid who was so dirty that things started to grow on her. Little radishes and veggies. And it just freaked me out. I mean, it was this harmless story, but for some reason I just flipped. I kept thinking about that kid, all crusted with dirt, with green stuff sprouting from her. It made me sick." "You're making me sick," Audrey said. "And then the parents pulled them out, the veggies. They pulled them off her." "Stop it," Dee commanded. "Like I said, it was stupid. A kid's thing." "I don't think it was stupid. I think it was horrible. And I think you were smart and brave the way you dealt with it," Jenny said. Michael's soulful eyes widened at the unprecedented compliments, and he gave her a rumpled grin. The unseen clock struck 1. There was something eerie about the way it echoed. Morning is coming, Jenny thought. We'd better get moving, Dee said, just as Michael made a stifled sound. What's wrong? Audrey began, but then she saw it too. In the darkness of the hall, where nothing had been before. A staircase. Chapter 10. Excitement bubbled up in Jenny. Finally, we can go somewhere. And get out of this freaking hallway, Dee said. Michael was looking odd. It's just like going up to the next level of a video game. But Audrey pursed her lips. When Jenny asked why, Audrey gave her a sideways glance under spiky dark lashes. One thing about video games. The farther you go, the harder they get, she said. Nest see pass? The stairs had rubber padding with the ridges worn almost to nothing. Jenny couldn't see the top from where she stood. The roof of the haunted mansion hall was in the way. What are we waiting for? Dee said, and vaulted onto the steps. Then she grabbed for the railing. As soon as her foot touched a step, the whole staircase had started moving with a jerk. It was wheezing, groaning, shivering escalator. Oh, geez, Michael said. I hate to tell you this, but when I was a kid, I was scared of escalators. I was afraid they might catch the end of my muffler or something. You don't wear mufflers, Audrey said and shoved him on. Mike, if you're scared of escalators, then this one is probably your fault, Jenny said, stepping on behind him. Remember, he gets it all from us. As they neared the top, Jenny found they were riding directly toward a mirror. In fact, she discovered when she looked down the hall after helping Mike jump off the escalator at the strategic moment, there were mirrors everywhere. The hallway downstairs had been dark. This one was exactly the opposite. Light bounced and rainbowed off the mirrors lining the zigzagging walls until Jenny saw colored streaks even with her eyes closed. In fact, the mirrored walls zigged and zagged so sharply that it was impossible to get a clear view for more than a few feet. You had to veer alternately right and left to follow the hallway's path, and anything in the bend before you or behind you was invisible. All right, who put these here? Dee demanded. Are my legs really that short, or are these trick mirrors? Audrey asked, pivoting. Michael made one effort to straighten his wrinkled gray sweats and then gave up. Jenny's own reflection made her uncomfortable. She seemed to hear Julian's voice in her mind. Eyes as green as cypress and hair like liquid amber. That wasn't what she saw. Just now Jenny saw a girl with flushed cheeks, whose hair were clinging to her forehead in little damp curls, whose tissue linen blouse was beginning to go limp, and whose flowing cotton skirt was dusty and grass-stained. "Right or left? Take your pick," she said, glancing up and down the hallway. "Left," Dee said firmly, and they went that way, zigging and zagging with the acute turns. The mirrors were disconcerting. Everywhere Jenny looked, her image was thrown back at her, and thrown from mirror to mirror, so that she saw herself coming and going, reflected to infinity on all sides. "Stay in this place long enough and you might forget which one is really you," she thought. As in the other hallway, there were no deviations from the pattern, nothing to distinguish any part of it from any other. It was especially nerve-wracking not being able to see more than one turn behind you, and not knowing what might be waiting around the next turn ahead. Images of the creeper and the lurker went through Dee's mind. "Dee, slow down," Jenny said as Dee's long, light step took her out of sight for the third time. Dee was navigating the corridor like a skier on a slalom, plunging in and out of the sharp turns, while the rest of them walked with hands outstretched to help them tell reflections from reality. "No, you guys hurry up!" Dee's voice was responding from the next bend, and then there was a flash. It seemed to reflect from everywhere at once, but Jenny thought it came from ahead. She and Audrey and Michael stood frozen for a moment, then hurried forward. Dee was standing, hands on her hips, in front of a door. It was mirrored like the walls, but Jenny figured it had to be a door because there was a red button like an elevator button beside it. When she looked hard, she could distinguish the door's outline from the mirror around it. Above the red button was a blue light bulb, round as a clown's nose. "It just appeared," Dee said, and snapped her fingers, like that, in that flash. From the turn ahead they heard whimpering. "Summer!" Jenny, Dee, and Audrey exclaimed simultaneously. It was Summer, huddled in the next bend, her spun sugar curls resting on her folded arms, her legs drawn beneath her china blue shirt dress. She looked up with a little hysterical cry at their approach. "Is it really you?" "Yes," Jenny said, kneeling. She was a little frightened by the expression in Summer's eyes. "Really, really you?" "Yes. Oh, Summer." Worriedly, Jenny put her arms around the smaller girl and felt her trembling. I've been alone here so long, and I kept seeing myself, and then sometimes I thought I saw other people, but when I ran toward them, they weren't there. Who have you seen? Jenny asked. Sometimes Zachary, and sometimes him. He scares me, Jenny. Summer buried her small face in Jenny's vest. He scares me too, Jenny thought. She said, there's nothing to be frightened of now. We're really here, see? Summer managed a watery smile. Poor Sunbunny, Michael said. I guess it must be your nightmare next. Good job, Mr. Tactful, Dee said under her breath. They explained about the nightmares to Summer. She wasn't as disturbed as Jenny thought she might be. Anything to get out of here, she said. I know. I've only been here 20 minutes and I hate the place already, Dee said. Anybody for claustrophobia? In front of the door, Jenny hesitated with her finger on the button. I don't suppose you want to tell us what you drew for your nightmare? She said. She didn't have much hope. None of the others had told. Okay, Summer said readily. It was a messy room. A messy room? Michael said. Oh, horror. No, really, Summer, Audrey said with a briskly adult air. It'll help us if you tell us. Dee flashed an amused ebony glance at her. I did tell you. It's a messy room. It's all right, Summer, Jenny said gently. We'll deal with it when we get there. She pushed the red button. The blue light went on. The door slid open. It was a messy room. You see, Summer said. It was Summer's bedroom, only more so. Ever since Jenny had known Summer, her room had been messy. Summer's parents were refugees from the 60s, and everything in their house was slightly frayed or weathered. But as Michael said, Summer herself had clutter down to a fine art. When you visited her, you usually couldn't see the handmade tie-dyed curtains at the window or the bright patchwork quilt on the bed, because of the things hanging from them or piled up in front of them or scattered on top of them. In the room behind the mirrored door, Jenny couldn't even see the bed. There was a small clear space in front of the closet. Everything else was obscured by piles of junk. Dee and Michael were giggling. Trust you, Sunshine, to have a nightmare like this, Dee said. Jenny sighed, not nearly as amused. All right, everybody, let's go in. I suppose we have to clean it up. There must be a door somewhere along one of the far walls. Hey, wait. I don't do the C word, Michael protested, alarmed. Besides, Dust is bad for my allergies. In, said Audrey, taking him by the ear. They all squeezed in between the closet and the piles. The door slid noiselessly shut behind them and disappeared. Talk about claustrophobia, Michael gasped. Seti chambre est uni varai pagaili, Audrey said under her breath. What? Jenny asked. I said this is one messy room. Summer, how can you stand it? Summer's delft blue eyes filled with tears. My real room isn't as bad as this. This is my nightmare, dummy. Well, why this kind of nightmare? Audrey said, not softening. Because my mom never yells about my room. But once my Nana came to visit and she almost passed out. I still dream about what she said. Don't make her feel bad, Jenny whispered to Audrey. Try to clear a path around the edges. She said aloud, and check every wall for the door. The piles of junk were amazingly varied. There were heaps of rumpled clothes, year-old magazines, disjointed Ray-Bans, spindled cassette tapes, unstrung string bikinis, crushed frozen yogurt cups, bent photographs, mismatched sandals, dry felt-tip pens, chewed pencils, twisted headphones, musty towels, endless mounds of underwear, and a zoo of bedraggled stuffed animals. Also a dog-chewed frisbee, a mashed twister mat, and a futon that smelled like somebody's bottom. It's Spider City here, Dee said, gathering up one of the heaps. Haven't you ever heard of Raid? I believe in live and let live, Summer said vaguely. It really was a nightmare of sorts, Jenny thought. A nightmare of tedium. But Dee worked with tireless energy and Audrey with fastidious precision, and slowly they forged a path through the debris. Michael was no good at all. He stopped to leaf through every magazine he picked up. They were getting to a different type of garbage, a type that made Audrey wrinkle up her nose. Blackened avocado husks, mildewed newspapers, and plastic glasses with the dregs of unidentifiable liquids in them. Then Jenny lifted a box of odds and ends and saw something like a pressed flower on the hardwood floor underneath. But it wasn't a flower. It was the wrong shape. At first, she didn't recognize it. Then she saw the little muzzle and the tiny curled up feet. It was a flat and desiccated mouse. She couldn't help gasping. I can't touch that. I can't. I can't. Dee scraped it up with a 1991 calendar and threw it in the closet. Jenny felt a whisper of terror inside her, unease that went beyond disgust at the mouse. The garbage got worse and worse, like what you would find at a dump, nothing that would be in anybody's bedroom. Food in all stages of decomposition, every kind of refuse, trash, and litter. No one was smiling anymore. Dee picked up a tattered Easter basket, paused. An awful smell wafted from it. She stirred the cellophane grass with one long finger, and then her face convulsed. In the basket was a solid mass of white, writhing maggots. God! In one fluid motion, Dee threw the basket at the closet, where it hit the door and scattered a shower of white. Michael bolted up from his magazine with a yell. Audrey and Summer were shrieking. Jenny felt the quick, cold touch of real fear. Summer, just what did your grandmother say about your room? She said. Oh, she said things were growing in it, Summer reported, her eyes large and worried. She said it would attract bugs. She said it looked like an earthquake hit it. She said someday I would get lost in it and never come out. Dee, who had been staring at Summer, now caught a glance of startled revelation at Jenny. "Uh-huh," she said. The tension in the room was palpable. "And just what kind of nightmares do you have about it?" Jenny asked, trying to discipline her voice. "Oh," Summer shivered. "Well, it's like I hear a scratchy noise, and then I look, and it's these cockroaches, but they're big as sneakers. And then I see this thing on the floor. It's like fungus, sort of a column of fungus, but it's got a kind of mouth on the top and it's howling. It's howling fungus." Summer's lips were trembling now. It may not sound scary, but it was. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. A primitive warning was going off in Jenny's brain. She, Audrey, Dee, and Michael all looked at one another. "It sounds plenty scary to me," she said. "I think maybe we'd better get moving." Michael's lips were puckered in a soundless whistle. "I think maybe you're right," he muttered. He bent to work without another word of complaint. The closet was full by now, and they were just transferring things from before them to behind them, like digging a tunnel. The garbage kept getting grosser and grosser and scarier and scarier. Things Jenny didn't want to touch with her hands. She wore crumpled t-shirts like oven mitts to move them. Then the bugs came. It startled with a rustle. a pleasant sound like a taffeta prom dress. Jenny stiffened, then turned slowly to look. A cockroach, flat and brown, but it was large, far larger than Jenny's foot. It crawled languidly out of the floor vent, squirming through somehow, its barbed back legs catching on the metal louvers. Its feet made soft, ticking sounds on the paper debris. Summer gave a reedy shriek and pointed at it. Then another one came out of the vent, and another. Summer's pointing finger became a shaky blur. Jenny reached for a water glass to revive her and snatched her hand back. The glass was jam-packed with crickets, antennae twitching delicately. Summer saw it. She stopped pointing and went still. Smaller roaches emerged from a discarded candy box, the frilly paper cups crinkling as the bugs crept out. Summer's face was so white there were blue patches under her eyes. Iridescent green beetles the size of footballs began to climb the walls. They flexed their chitinous outer wings, their membranous inner wings hanging out like dragging petticoats. Summer stood like a statue of ice. Jenny looked up. A dozen brown moths, as big as small kites, were clinging flat to the ceiling, their dark spotted wings outstretched. "Come on, Summer, help us," Audrey said in a fear-clotted voice as she racked at the trash. Disturbed ants swarmed out of it, forming thick trails like black waterfalls over the debris. Summer didn't move. She was staring at one of the hard-shelled beetles like a witless rabbit caught in a headlight. The ground rocked beneath Jenny's feet. At first, she thought it was some effect of the garbage shifting. Then she remembered. She said it looked like an earthquake hit it. "We have to hurry," she shouted at the same time as Dee yelled, "Go, go!" They were clawing through the garbage now, tearing just enough away from the wall to reveal cracked and peeling wallpaper to make sure there was no door. They climbed on the smaller mounds, wading through them. The ground shook again. The whisper of terror inside Jenny had become a scream. "Hurry!" she gasped, clearing refuse with sweeps of her arms. "Hurry, hurry!" The towering piles of rubbish quaked. They were all working frenetically, even Michael. Only Summer stood rooted in horror. "The door!" Dee shouted from the top of a pile. Jenny's head snapped up. Relief flooded through her. Barely visible above a stinking pile, she could see the rectangular molding of the door. "It opens in," Audrey said. "We have to get all this stuff out of the way." They scrambled over each other, ripping at the pile. A cockroach climbed onto Jenny's foot. She kicked it off. Time to scream later. The room shook again. Jenny looked up and her breath hissed in. There were ominous cracks in the ceiling. At that moment, Dee and Michael cleared the last rubble from the door. With a thankful sob, Jenny helped them pull it open. Then she turned to look back. What she saw wasn't anybody's room. It was hell. There were huge cracks in the floor with monstrous mutant bugs crawling out. The ceiling was buckling and plaster was filtering down. The moths, disturbed, were fluttering through the air, their wings making a sound like huge cards shuffling, and sprouting like grotesque anemones among the refuse were objects Jenny didn't recognize. They looked like drooping sea cucumbers, and they were green-gray. Audrey and Michael had stumbled out into the hall of mirrors. Dee was holding the door. The earth rumbled again. "Summer, come on!" Jenny shouted. Summer turned toward her voice, her large blue eyes blind. She took a step toward Jenny. One of the grots directly in her path straightened up. It became a column. At the top of the column there was an aperture that flared open and shut. The aperture opened wide. A demented, obscene sound came out. It was howling. The other grots were straightening. The morning siren sound doubled, tripled. They were between Summer and the door. Summer turned and stumbled back toward the closet, shrieking, "Summer, no! Come back!" The ground heaved. The piles of garbage were toppling, falling into the clear path. The mutant bugs skittered around in a frenzy. They seemed to be heading toward Summer. The fungus howled. Summer's shrieks gave way to full-throated screaming. "Summer!" Adrenaline kicked in and Jenny plunged into the garbage, trying to climb it. "Jenny, come back!" Dee shouted. More rubbish fell. Jenny couldn't see Summer at all. The screams were fading. "Jenny, I can't hold the door." The screams fell silent. Only the howling went on. "Summer!" The earth jerked violently. "It's coming down!" Dee shouted, and Jenny felt a hand grab her, pull her backward. "No, we have to get Summer." "We can't get anybody. Come on." "No, Summer!" Jenny screamed, turning again. Dee ducked and caught Jenny around the waist. Jenny found herself flying over Dee's shoulders out the door. Michael and Audrey grabbed her. Through the open door, Jenny saw the ceiling come down. Dee staggered out and fell beside them. Jenny didn't have the strength to stand up. Then the door slammed shut as the toppling piles fell against it. "Look," Michael said in a thick voice. The door was disappearing. It did a slow fade. like a still frame in a movie. It was a door. It was a slightly misty door. It was a transparent door, with mirror showing through. It was a mirrored wall. Jenny was staring wildly at her own image. She could see the others in the mirror. Audrey was white as china. Dee's face was grey. Michael looked numb. They huddled on the carpet, stunned. It had happened with such terrible suddenness. Jenny whispered. When Dee was late coming out of Audrey's nightmare, the door didn't disappear. It stayed there, and she came out. But this time, God, said Dee in a very low voice. There was a long silence. Audrey, finally, was the one to say the words. She's dead. Jenny put her hands towards her face. It was a gesture she would never have thought she would use. At the moment, it just happened. She wanted to hide from the world. She wanted to make everything that had happened unhappen. It's not fair, she whispered. She never hurt anybody. Then she was standing, shouting to the echoing hallway. It's not fair. It's not fair, damn you. She didn't deserve it. It's not fair. Jenny, Jenny, calm down. Come on now, Jenny. Please, just sit down, okay? They were all trying to hold her. Jenny realized she wasn't in control of herself. She was trembling violently, and her throat hurt from screaming. As suddenly as it had come, the hysterical energy faded. Jenny felt herself falling. They set her down. It's okay, Dee said, and Jenny felt a hand stroking her hair. At any other time, it would have surprised her. Now she felt nothing. It's okay to be upset, Dee said. They didn't understand. It was Jenny's fault. She was the one who had gotten them into this. If she had kissed Julian in the Earl King's cavern, she could have gotten Summer out. As if to mock her, an unseen clock struck 2. But Jenny could only sit. Chapter 11. What's taking them so long? Dee said. Audrey and Michael had gone off to see if they could find Zack, who they figured must be around here somewhere, or if they could find water or a blanket or something for Jenny. Jenny was in bad shape. She was slumped against the slanting mirrored wall opposite Summer's door. What had been Summer's door? There wasn't a trace of the exit from Summer's nightmare left, but Jenny wouldn't leave this place. Jenny ached. All she could think of in between waves of grayness was Summer. Summer had joined their group in 4th grade after she, Tom, Dee, Zach, and Michael were already friends. Tiny, muddled, and very sweet. Summer had needed to be taken care of, and taking care was what Jenny did best. But not this time. This time Jenny had screwed up, and Summer was gone. Jenny still didn't believe it had really happened. Summer would come walking out of that mirror any second now, all thistledown hair and dark blue eyes, any second now. Summer didn't. Jenny let her head drop back against the wall. "I'm going to look for them," Dee said. "They've been too long. They might be in trouble. You stay here, okay? Promise you'll stay right here." Her voice was slow and clear, the voice you'd use to talk to a child. Eyes shut, Jenny made some slight motion with her head. "Okay, I'll be back in a minute." Jenny's mind drifted back into a haze. Summer climbing a tree at camp. Summer at Newport Beach falling off a surfboard. Summer at school chewing on a pencil. Summer laughing. Summer puzzled. Summer's blue eyes filled with tears. She didn't have a mean bone in her body, Jenny thought. She was a good person. Something like this can't happen to a good person, can it? She saw the flash even through closed lids. Summer, she thought, opening her eyes. But the mirror in front of her showed only her own pale face, anxious and disarrayed hair. Maybe it had come from the side. Which way? On her feet, Jenny looked to the right and left, dazzled by the multiple reflections. She didn't even know which way Dee had gone. She went right, veering back and forth around the zigzag mirrors. Turning a corner, she saw dozens of reflections of a round blue light bulb. She caught her breath sharply. The blue light was on. The red button beneath it was depressed. Beside it was a dark rectangle, an open door. Numb to caution, Jenny poked her head in. She could see only darkness inside. None of the light from the hallway seemed to penetrate. Had Audrey and Michael gone in here? Had Dee? Could Summer? With a click, the button popped out. The door began to close. Jenny had an instant to choose. Jump back or jump forward. She jumped forward. The door slid noiselessly shut behind her, and she stared around, trying to see in the gloom. She could make out shapes like a row of shelves, something on a tripod, a tall lamp. Then she knew where she was. It was dim simply because the lights were off. As her eyes adjusted, she recognized a giant mural print on one wall. It showed cafeteria tables stacked in a glorious pyramid, one trash can on each end at each level, a marvel of engineering. Jenny knew that picture well. She, Tom, and Dee had spent an entire night stacking those tables and listening to Zach's imperious demands for one more shot. It had been one of the more hysterical and terrifying adventures of their sophomore year. This was her cousin Zach's garage, converted into a studio. It felt almost like home, but there was no one inside. The dark room, Jenny thought, and followed the special L-shaped hallway Zach had built, a light trap, he called it, to the little room nestled within the garage. She pushed aside the curtain at the entrance. The amber-safe light shone on a single figure's back, on a flannel shirt and a casual ponytail. "Zach!" Jenny ran to him, but he didn't turn around. "Zach, it's me, Jenny. Zach, what are you doing?" He was gently rocking a tray full of chemicals with a print in it. His body was stiff and resistant, but Jenny turned him by force. Even in this light, she could see he looked tranced. The look she had seen first in the living room when he had insisted on turning more game cards, and then in the parlor when all the rest of them were freaking out. "Oh, Zach, what's wrong with you?" she said, and threw her arms around him. She had been worried about him all night. She had been planning to comfort him, to help, but now she didn't have the strength. She desperately needed help herself. He scarcely seemed to notice she was there. He pushed her away and turned back to agitating the tree. "Zachary, did Dee come in here? Have you seen Audrey or Michael?" His voice was slow, dragging, but matter-of-fact. "I haven't seen anybody. I was sitting out there, where the mirrors are. Then I saw a flash gun go off. When I looked for it, I found a door. I pushed the button and went in. A flash gun. Of course, that was how Zach would interpret the bursts of light in the hallway. "But what are you doing?" Jenny said. "It was all set up for me. The print was already in the developer. Somewhere a timer went off, and he pulled away from Jenny's reaching hand. I have to rinse it now." Jenny blinked painfully as he turned the white light on. She watched his careful, clever fingers as he rinsed the print and plastered it wetly against the wall. Standing back to evaluate it, frowning. "Zach, please, you have to listen." The numbness over summer was wearing off. Zach was her blood relative, and right here, and in trouble. In this light, she could see how pale his narrow face was. She could also see the fixed look in his clear grey eyes. Don't you realize this is your nightmare? We can't waste time. We have to find a door to get out. Zack! He pushed her away again. I have to finish this job. I have to. She was barely in time to catch him as he collapsed. But when she did, he didn't push her away again. He clung to her like a frightened child. Jenny. Sorry. It's okay. She held him tightly, almost rocking him. It's okay. I'm here. That's what cousins are for. After a minute, he tried to straighten up, but she still held him, encouraging him to hold her back. She needed comfort as much as he did, and Zack had always been there for her. Before their families had moved out to California. She and Zack had lived next door to each other. They had played Indians in the cherry orchard behind their houses. That was in the days before Zack decided he liked photographs better than people, when Zack's grey eyes had been warm instead of winter cool. Her cousin's mind was obviously following the same track. Just like when we were kids, he said with what was probably supposed to be a laugh. And you would get all scraped up climbing trees, and we would wash you with the hose so Aunt Lil won't get mad, Jenny said. She laughed herself, muffled against Zack's shoulder. It was almost like crying. Oh, Zack, I'm so glad I found you. Me too, he sighed. I've been feeling pretty weird. Everything's been awful, Jenny said, and once again her voice was shaking badly. I've been so scared, and now she couldn't bring herself to mention summer. The words stuck in her throat. It's okay, he said. We're together now. We'll make things okay. A hose and a band-aid aren't going to help this time, Jenny thought. But it was easier just to hold on to Zack, tighter and tighter, exchanging comfort without words. He was stroking her hair, and it felt good, soothing. She seemed to feel strength flowing from his body to hers. And something else, a warmth that surprised her. Zack was usually so cool. Now he was holding her and caressing her almost as if she were some toddler that needed pacifying, or as if he weren't her cousin, but her boyfriend. She pushed the thought away. Zack was just being kind. He wanted to help, and he was helping. She felt better, simply absorbing his sympathy, his affection, his tenderness. She leaned against him, letting him support her weight, feeling secure, cared for, safe. When he kissed the back of her neck, it was so tenderly it didn't disturb the safe feeling. Zack was nice. She loved him. She was happy to know he loved her. When he kissed her again, An unexpected tremor ran through her. Now, she wasn't supposed to feel like that. Not with Zack. He shouldn't. He really shouldn't. But she didn't want to pull away from him or spoil the moment. His lips were warm on the back of her neck. A shock of sweetness passed through Jenny, this time too strong to be ignored. That felt. She knew she must not feel that way. Her hands went up to his arms to push at him. "Zack," she whispered, "I think we're both a little upset. We're not ourselves." "I know," Zack said, as if it hurt him. "I'm sorry. I—" He straightened, loosening his grip a little, but then he kissed her hair. She felt his lips moving, felt his warm breath there. "Zachary," she said. "It's wrong. We are cousins." The problem was that although her words were strong, her voice wasn't. She could barely breathe, and she didn't move away. "Half cousins," he said. It was true, although Jenny seldom thought of it. Her mother and his were only half-sisters. "And besides, I can't help it. I can't help it." His kisses were coming faster. His urgency caught Jenny in a rush of elemental feeling. She kept thinking, "But there's something else," without remembering what the something was. Then she whispered, "But Tom," and shock swept through her. She hadn't thought about Tom since she couldn't remember when. Zack was saying that he couldn't help Tom either. "He doesn't deserve you." The words came on a warm wave of breath in her ear. "He doesn't love you enough." "I was always afraid to say it, but you know it's true." Despite his slimness, Zack's muscles were hard against her. Jenny tried to protest, but the words caught in her throat. "And now I know you don't love him enough either. You weren't meant to be with him." Zack's voice was soft and reasonable, his words running together in a velvet sound. Then he was looking down at her. A clear light seemed to shine through his intense face. His winter-grey eyes looked almost pale blue. "You can't fight something like this, Jenny," he whispered. "You know you can't." Jenny shut her eyes and turned her face up. He kissed her, and her senses reeled. They seemed to melt together. Jenny felt herself sinking beneath his embrace. So soft. Kissing had never been so soft before. She couldn't think anymore. She was flying. She was deep underwater. Pure sensation overwhelmed her. She was kissing him back as she had never kissed Tom. His hair was loose under her fingers. It must have come out of the ponytail. She wanted to feel all of it. It was so much softer than she had realized. She had always thought of Zack as having rather coarse hair, but this was so soft, like silk or cat's fur under her fingertips. She heard the wild, whimpering sound she made, and she knew, even as she was pulling back, even as she was jerking away, she knew. Julian's eyes were like liquid sapphires under sooty lashes, heavy-lidded and dark with passion. He was wearing a plaid flannel shirt like Zack's shirt, stone-washed denims like Zack's denims, and running shoes like Zack's shoes. But he had a languid, careless grace Zack would never have. His hair looked bright as sand in the moonlight. Jenny was scrubbing her mouth with the back of her hand, a purely reflexive and senseless gesture. She was too shocked to be angry. Did I know? Did I know underneath before he kissed me or while he was kissing me, but before I pulled away, did I know? Could I possibly have known? She still couldn't make out what reality was. How could you know? She whispered. You acted like Zack. You knew things only he would know. I've watched him, Julian said. I've watched you. I'm the Shadow Man, Jenny, and I love you. His voice was soft, mesmerizing, and something inside Jenny began to melt at the very sound. Then she thought of summer. Anger, hot and bright, surged through her and gave her strength. She looked into Julian's liquid blue eyes. Any softness she had ever had toward him had disappeared. She hated him now. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the dark room. He followed her, flicking the garage lights on. He knew, of course, what she was thinking about. She agreed, he said, just like all the rest of you. She agreed to play the game. She didn't know it was real. He quoted from the instructions. I acknowledge that the game is real. You can talk all you want, Julian, but you killed her. I didn't do anything to her. Her own fear did that. She couldn't face her nightmare. Jenny knew there was no point in arguing with him, but she couldn't help it. In a low, savage voice, she said, It wasn't fair. He shook his head, looking almost amused. Life isn't fair, Jenny. Haven't you heard? Haven't you learned that lesson yet? Jenny was raging on. What gives you the right to play with us this way? How can you justify it? I don't need the right. Listen to me, Jenny. The worlds, all 9 of them, are cruel. They don't care anything about you or about right. There is no ultimate goodness. It's the law of the jungle. You don't need right if you have strength. I don't believe you, Jenny said. That the world is cruel? There was a newspaper on the bench. He picked it up. Take a look at this and tell me that evil loses and good wins. Tell me that it's not the law of the jungle in your world. Jenny didn't even want to look at the headlines. She had seen too many in her life. Reality, Julian said, flashing a smile, has teeth and claws. And since that's true, wouldn't you rather be one of the hunters than one of the hunted? Jenny shook her head. She had to admit the truth of what he was saying, about the world at least. But she felt sick to her stomach. I'm offering you a choice, Julian said. His face had hardened. I told you before that if I couldn't persuade you, I would force you, somehow. If you won't agree, I'll have to show you what I mean. I'm tired of playing, Jenny. I want this settled, one way or another. It is settled, said Jenny. I'll never come to you. I hate you. Anger flared like a twisting blue flame in Julian's eyes. Don't you understand, he said, that what happened to Summer can happen to you? Jenny felt a wave of coldness. Yes, she said slowly, I do. And she did, at last. She probably wouldn't have believed it before, wouldn't have believed Julian was capable of it, or that she, Jenny, could be vulnerable to it. Dying was for old people, not kids her age. Bad things, really bad things, didn't happen to good people. But they did. Now she knew that emotionally, in her heart. Sometimes bad things, the worst, happened to people who didn't deserve it at all, even Summer, even her. Jenny felt as if she had learned some secret, been initiated into some worldwide club or community, the community of sorrow. She was now one of the people who knew. Strangely, it gave her a sense of comfort to know that there were so many others, so many who had had friends die or lost parents or had other terrible things happen that they never asked for. There are a lot of us, she thought. Without realizing it, she had begun to cry. We are everywhere, and we don't all turn hunter and take it out on other people. All of us don't. Abba hadn't. Jenny suddenly remembered that Dee's grandmother had lost her husband in a racial incident, and she remembered something Abba had taped to her bathroom mirror, incongruous among all the glass and marble and gold fixtures. It was a handmade sign that said, Do no harm. Help when you can. Return good for evil. Jenny had never asked Abba about the sign. It didn't seem to need explaining. Now she felt the community of sorrow strengthening her from all over, as if they were sympathizing silently. Bad things, the worst, might happen to Jenny right now. Jenny understood that. She said, "You're right. Maybe things are that bad, but that doesn't mean I have to give in. I won't join you willingly, so you might as well try force." "I will," he said. It started so simply. Jenny heard a whining buzz and a bee landed on her sleeve. It was just an ordinary bee, dusty gold. It clung with its little feet to her tissue linen blouse. But then she heard another buzz, and a second bee landed on her other sleeve. Another buzz, and another. Jenny hated bees. She was always the ones at picnics shrieking, "Is there one in my hair?" She wanted to shoo these bees away, but she was afraid to provoke them. She looked at Julian, at his wild, exotic sapphire eyes and his beautifully sculpted face. At that moment, wearing Zach's lackluster clothing, his beauty was so unearthly it was frightening. Another buzz, and a bee was in her hair, its wings a blur of motion as it tangled and clung. She could see it in her peripheral vision. Julian smiled. Jenny heard a deeper sound, a thrumming, and she looked automatically for the source. A swarm of bees was clustered on one of the rafters of the garage, hanging down like some giant, pendulous fruit. Jenny took a step backward and heard the warning buzz from her hair. The ball of bees was moving, breaking up, becoming a dark cloud, heading toward her. Jenny looked once more at Julian, and then bees began to fall on her like hail. They clung to her arms, her shoulders, her breasts. She had to hold her arms away from her body in order to keep from crushing the ones on her sides. She knew that if she did that, they would sting. Then it simply became a nightmare, unreal. They were heavy, covering her like a blanket. Too heavy. Jenny staggered. She shut her eyes because they were crawling out of her hair onto her face. She was inundated with bees, layer upon layer of them. They were clinging to each other now because there was almost no part of her body clear of them. Her fingertips, some parts of her face. She felt their feet on her cheeks and wanted to scream, but she didn't. She couldn't. She couldn't scream because if she did, they would get into her mouth, and then she would lose her sanity. But she couldn't breathe well enough through her nose. Her chest was heaving, and their weight was crushing her. She was going to have to open her mouth. She was crying silently, trying not to move, to disturb them more than she could help. Julian's voice came to her. "Just say the word, Jenny." She could only shake her head slightly, the barest minimum of motion, but what she could manage she did. She was still sobbing without a sound, terrified to move, but she would not give in. "You can do whatever you like to me," she thought. In the dark beneath her bee-covered eyes she tried to hold on to consciousness, but it was like a thin thread slipping through her fingers. She grasped at it, felt it being snatched away from her. She was fainting, falling, but she wouldn't give in. "When I hit the ground and crush them, they'll go mad. They'll kill me," she thought. But she never said the word to stop it. She felt the darkness come as she began to fall.